The secret in the box would have changed everything, but a single slap sent Laura and her unborn baby's fate hurtling down the hospital corridors. So what was written in that letter that brought Santiago to his knees? And will Laura truly forgive him? You'll find out soon. Stay with us. The door slams shut violently, shaking the walls. Santiago, blinded by uncontrollable rage, lunges at Laura, his eyes burning with jealousy and despair. She tries to back away, but it's too late. The blow is sharp, brutal, reverberating like a silent thunderclap. A muffled groan escapes Laura's lips as the metallic scent of blood fills the room, mingling with the suffocating smell of fear. For a moment, everything is frozen in a devastating silence. Laura's body slowly falls to the floor, lifeless, like a rag doll. Santiago remains paralyzed, staring at his own trembling hands, stained with the blood of the woman he claimed to love more than his own life. An overwhelming anguish invades him as his breathing becomes heavy, broken by the crushing weight of regret, in an almost inaudible whisper that rumbles like thunder in his conscience. He murmurs desperately, "My God, what have I done?" Years ago, no one would have imagined it. Santiago and Laura were one of those couples who stole glances at family gatherings. Young, attractive, smiling, always holding hands. In the photos, they looked inseparable, friends and acquaintances. Even the waiters at their wedding said the same thing. They are truly made for each other. But appearances can be deceiving, and when love goes wrong, it hurts more than any physical wound. They met in a cafe in downtown Guadalajara. Laura was reading a book while waiting for a friend. Santiago walked in by chance, ordered a coffee to go, and when he saw her, he stopped. In his words, it was as if time had frozen. She looked up, looked at him, and smiled. That was enough. The first few weeks were intense. He was thoughtful, attentive, always doing something romantic, bringing roses to her work, sending her good morning messages, taking her for walks in the Metropolitan Park on Sunday evenings. Laura felt like she was in a fairy tale. Her friends envied her luck. Her mother said she had finally found a man who valued her, but there were things she didn't mention. Like that time, just 3 months after they started dating, when Santiago made a scene because she didn't answer her cell phone in 15 minutes. Or the time he surprised her by accompanying her to work and stayed in the car, watching to see if she talked to anyone else. Laura even excused him to herself. "He just loves me so much," she told herself. "He's just very passionate, very intense." Over time, that intensity became part of everyday life. She stopped wearing makeup like she used to. He didn't ask her to stop outright, but he always found a subtle way to make her feel guilty if she did. "Who are you wearing makeup for?" he would ask with a half smile. When Laura changed her profile picture on social media, he would call her immediately. "Who are you trying to impress?" Laura laughed at first. She thought it was silly jealousy, something that would calm down over time. But that wasn't the case. One night, at a dinner with friends, a classmate of Laura's from college came over to greet her with a hug. Nothing out of the ordinary. But Santiago, sitting at the other end of the table, squeezed his beer glass so hard, he almost broke it. He didn't say anything at the time, but when they got home, the argument was brutal. "Do you like other men hugging you? You enjoy feeling desired, don't you?" He was just a friend, Santiago. A friend. Well, behave like a married woman. Laura cried that night in the bathroom while he slept in the living room. The next day, as usual, he arrived with flowers. "Forgive me, my love. It's just that I love you so much that I go crazy. I don't want to lose you." And Laura forgave him, as always. But there were cracks, small ones, invisible to others, but painful for those who experienced them. Cracks that grew slowly, silently, like rotten roots underground. Sometimes, when they talked about the future, Laura imagined herself with children, with a house full of laughter, but something stirred in her stomach. A restlessness she couldn't explain. The last time she tried to go out with her friends alone, Santiago video called her every 20 minutes. Laura felt ridiculous, answering from the restaurant bathroom, smiling nervously while her friends looked at her in silence. "Don't you get tired of it?" one of them asked her. Laura didn't answer because she was tired, but she was also trapped, confused, convinced that love required sacrifice. and that Santiago, despite his outbursts, was her destiny. She never imagined that his jealousy, his comments, his control disguised as love, would one day cross the line from invisible harm to physical pain. It was Thursday. The sun beat down on the streets of Guadalajara's historic center, and the air smelled of hot concrete, steamed tacos, and gasoline. Laura left work with a spring in her step, her bag slung over her shoulder, and a small smile on her face. She had been planning this moment for days. That night, she would give Santiago the news that would change their lives. She had bought a small light wood box with hand-carved details. Inside, she tenderly placed the pregnancy test and a letter she had been writing for weeks. "We're going to be parents," she wrote at the end in shaky handwriting, but full of excitement. At the entrance to the building, one of her co-workers, Emiliano, caught up with her. "Laura, did you drop this?" he said, handing her a keychain she hadn't noticed she had lost. They both laughed. She thanked him and they chatted for a couple of minutes. Nothing out of the ordinary. She tucked her hair behind her ear and he nodded his head in a friendly gesture. Santiago, parked a few meters away in his car, had been watching them for a while. The engine was still running. The soft music was barely a murmur, but in his mind, what he saw was not a casual conversation. What he heard was not innocent laughter. Santiago gripped the steering wheel with both hands until his knuckles turned white. Blood was rushing in his ears. When Laura said goodbye to Emiliano with a friendly gesture and started walking toward the car, she didn't notice that Santiago had already gotten out of the vehicle. He met her face to face, his eyes wide and his face hardened. "Did you have fun?" he asked dryly. "What? What are you talking about with your little boyfriend?" he snapped, his voice thick with contained rage. Laura tensed and looked around. There were people around, but at that hour the street was empty enough that no one would intervene. "Santiago, please don't start. It was just a conversation. He was giving me a no. Don't take me for—" Shout made her recoil. She tried to touch his arm, but he shook her off with a blow. "Do you like being seen? That's what turns you on, playing the saint, and then going off with someone else." Laura felt a twinge in her stomach, not from fear, but from helplessness, from that suffocating mixture of public humiliation and accumulated weariness. For the first time in a long time, she looked at him with a firmness he didn't like. "I'm not your property, Santiago. You have no right to treat me like this." And that was what set him off. It was as if those words had detonated an internal bomb. Santiago raised his hand without thinking and slapped her across the face with a sound like a sharp whip against her skin. The blow spun her around on her own feet. Laura staggered, tripped over the curb, and fell to her knees. People passing by stopped. A man shouted from across the street. A woman took out her cell phone, but Laura couldn't hear them. All she could feel was the burning in her face, the trembling in her legs, and that sharp pain in her abdomen, a pain that wasn't normal. Santiago looked down at her, breathing heavily, as if he had run for miles. He didn't seem to recognize her or himself. "Get up!" he said through clenched teeth. Laura could barely move. Her hands went straight to her belly, to that place where she now knew something very small was growing. Her eyes filled with tears, not only from the pain, but from the real and absolute fear of losing everything in a single instant. A couple approached, trying to help her. "Sir, step away," the man said in a firm voice. Santiago stepped back, as if he finally realized where he was, what he had just done. The scene was falling apart around him. Laura was loaded into an ambulance minutes later. She could barely keep her eyes open, muttering something no one could understand. She repeated one word over and over, almost in a whisper. "My baby, my baby." Santiago watched her drive away, the sirens painting the street with red and white lights. His world, which he always believed he controlled, was falling apart in slow motion in front of everyone. And he didn't know that that night, the blow he had struck had not only broken the face of the woman he claimed to love, it had broken something deeper, something that cannot be easily recovered. The apartment smelled of vanilla and new paper. On the small desk in the study, the box was still there, untouched, waiting for him. Laura had prepared it so carefully that it looked like a Christmas present. It was a simple little box made of light wood, but the sky blue ribbon, perfectly tied, spoke of hope. Inside, wrapped in a sheet of wax paper, was the pregnancy test. Positive. Next to it was a letter written by hand in black ink, the kind that is written from the heart, and reviewed 3 or 4 times to make sure that every word says exactly what she feels. Days earlier, Laura had felt the first symptoms: dizziness, nausea, and fatigue that did not go away with coffee or rest. She had gone to the pharmacy alone. She bought the test without telling anyone. She locked herself in the bathroom with cold hands and her heart racing. When she saw the 2 red lines, she sat down on the floor and covered her mouth with her hands. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She cried, but with emotion. For years, she had dreamed of being a mother. She thought that maybe a child would change everything, that Santiago would calm down, that the storm that sometimes clouded his mind would turn into gentle rain. She was convinced that inside him there was a good man trapped by his own demons. And now, with a baby on the way, maybe he would find the peace he so desperately needed. Secretly, Laura began to write him a letter. Each word was a mixture of tenderness and blind faith. In one part she said, "I want you to know that I chose you to be the father of our child. And even though we sometimes have differences, I believe in you. I believe this baby will bring us closer together than ever." On the afternoon of the incident, Laura had left work early to buy a few things: a little teddy bear blanket, a small stuffed animal with a blue hat, and a bib that said, "Daddy, you're my hero." Everything was hidden in a bag in the closet. She planned to take it out that night after dinner. She planned to leave the box on the bed and call him with a simple, "I have something to show you." She wanted to see his face, hear his reaction, hug him, feel that things were finally going to be okay. But none of that happened. Instead, Laura ended up on the floor with a swollen face and a trembling body. Meanwhile, in the empty house, the box remained in the same place, silent, waiting to be opened. Hours later, Santiago entered the apartment again. He didn't know why he had come back. Maybe because he couldn't stay on the street. Maybe because he had nowhere else to run. His hands were in his pockets, his cheeks dry, but his eyes were filled with a dangerous mixture of fear and denial. Everything was silent. Too silent. The clock in the hallway read 2:16 a.m. The lights were still off. Santiago entered the master bedroom, searching for something with a lost look in his eyes. Then he saw it, the box. He picked it up suspiciously and read her name written on a little card. "To Santiago, with all my love." He opened it slowly, and for the first time, the world stopped spinning. The positive test, the letter, the bib, the stuffed animal. Santiago collapsed onto the bed, holding his head in his hands. He felt a void in his chest, a sharp pain behind his eyes. He remembered her screams, the blow, Laura's hands covering her belly as she fell, the dull thud of her body hitting the ground. "No," he murmured, as if saying it quietly would erase what he had done. He read the letter, each word stabbing him like a knife. When he finished, he could no longer see clearly. Tears were streaming down his face. At that moment, he understood everything, and everything hurt. Not only had he failed Laura, he had failed his son, that little being she loved before she even saw him, that little piece of hope that had arrived in the middle of a storm, and that he could have destroyed with his own hands. Before continuing, we want to know more about you. Where are you listening from? Leave us a comment with the name of your city or country. We would love to know how far our stories are reaching. The Guadalajara General Hospital was bathed in the cold white light of fluorescent bulbs. Outside, in the emergency room, the air was thick, filled with murmurs, cries, and the smell of disinfectant. Santiago was sitting in one of the metal chairs with his elbows on his knees and his gaze fixed on the floor. His shirt was stained with dried blood, his eyes were red, and his hands were covered with marks from his own fingernails. He had run after the ambulance. He shouted Laura's name until they made him back off. They asked him to wait outside, not to interfere, to calm down. But how can someone calm down when they know that with their own hands, they may have killed everything they loved? Laura's mother arrived a few minutes later, as did her younger sister. When they saw him, they didn't say a word, not an insult, not a cry. They just looked at him as if he weren't human, as if he were a dark shadow that had stolen their daughter's light. "What have you done?" murmured the mother without looking directly at him. Santiago did not answer. He had no words. He just swallowed, and each swallow was like fire. His hands fought against the urge to scream, to run, to tear his skin off. 42 minutes passed, then an hour and a half. No one came out. No one said anything. Suddenly, a nurse came out through the sliding door. Her face was tense, and her uniform was stained with small red drops. Santiago Muñoz. He jumped up. Laura's mother stood in front of him with a look that could kill. "Is she okay? Is she conscious?" Santiago asked, his voice breaking. The nurse hesitated. She looked at him coldly, as if choosing each word carefully. "The doctor wants to talk to you alone." Santiago nodded. He followed the nurse down a long hallway where the smell of fresh blood mixed with latex and chlorine. His footsteps echoed hollowly, and his breathing was heavy, as if his whole body weighed more than 220 pounds. The doctor was waiting for him in front of a glass-walled room, tall, thin, with a gray beard. He didn't look good. "Are you the patient's husband?" Yes, I am. Your wife has multiple injuries, a skull contusion, a fracture in her right rib, and an internal hematoma that we are monitoring. Her condition is delicate but stable for now." Santiago closed his eyes for a second with a slight sigh of relief, but the doctor wasn't finished. "What you didn't know, Mr. Muñoz, is that your wife was pregnant." Santiago felt his stomach drop. The world blurred before his eyes. What did you say?" "She was about 8 weeks along. The impact to the abdominal area was severe. There is a risk of miscarriage. We are doing everything we can to stabilize the fetus, but the situation is critical. If the bleeding doesn't stop." The doctor didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Santiago took a step back, leaned against the wall, and breathed as if he were short of air, as if suddenly everything had become unreal. "I didn't know," he muttered, as if talking to himself. "She didn't tell me. I didn't know." The doctor looked at him harshly, coldly, professionally. "And if you had known, would it have been any different?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned around and left him there alone, trembling, his eyes fixed on the distorted reflection of himself in the glass wall. Santiago walked clumsily to the hospital bathroom, closed the door, and looked at himself in the mirror. His face was pale, his eyes red, his mouth dry. He vomited into the sink, clinging to the edges of the marble, gasping for breath. Then he hit the mirror, once, twice, 3 times. Until it broke, blood reappeared, this time his own, dripping from his knuckles onto the white floor. He sank to the floor with his head between his legs. The sound of his breathing enveloped everything. It wasn't crying, it wasn't guilt, it was something else. It was the absolute terror of knowing that there might be no turning back, that he had already crossed that line. Minutes later, someone knocked on the door. "Mr. Muñoz, your wife was taken to intensive care," and then a pause. "The baby shows a faint heartbeat, but it's very weak." Santiago closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he wanted to disappear. Santiago didn't go home that night, or the next. He spent 48 hours wandering aimlessly through the streets of Guadalajara, wearing the same clothes, his hands bandaged and his head in pieces. He walked until his feet hurt, until the sun burned him and the rain soaked him. He didn't eat, he didn't talk, he didn't answer calls. He sat on any bench. He crawled from shadow to shadow like a lost dog, like someone who no longer belongs anywhere. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Laura's face, her expression before she fell, the trickle of blood running down her forehead, her hands instinctively protecting her belly, and the doctor's voice repeating in his head like a cursed echo. "The baby still has a pulse, but it's very weak." Santiago cried silently, as he had never cried before. It was not a cry of comfort. It was a dry cry, the kind that scrapes your throat and burns your chest, the kind that doesn't clean anything, only shows that something inside you has broken, and there is no way to fix it. On Sunday morning, he decided to go to the hospital. He didn't have the strength to face anyone. He just wanted to see her, to see with his own eyes if she was still alive. He approached the reception desk with a low, trembling voice. The receptionist recognized him. Her gaze pierced him. "The patient is in intensive care. No visitors are allowed, especially not you." Santiago didn't argue. He just nodded, as if she were telling him something he already knew. Then he saw Laura's sister crossing the hallway. When she saw him, She stopped dead in her tracks. "Have you no shame?" she said in a dry tone, without raising her voice. "If my sister dies, or loses that baby, you're going to live with that for the rest of your life. Don't ever show up here again." Santiago looked down. He didn't answer. He didn't even try to defend himself. That night he slept in a cheap hostel. The room had little more than a bed, with a stained mattress and a broken lamp. He sat down in front of a blank sheet of paper he had asked for at the front desk, and began to write, not to Laura, but to himself. When did I become this? When was the first time I humiliated her? When was the first time I believed I had a right to her body, her voice, her life? He wrote until his hand hurt. Each sentence was a confession, each word a dagger. He remembered all the times Laura cried silently, all the times she doubted herself because of him, the times he made her feel inferior, mocked her, questioned her, was jealous of her for no reason. I never needed to raise my hand to hurt her. I had been hurting her all along with every word, with every glance. Santiago stopped writing and rested his forehead on the table. He didn't know if what he felt was guilt or punishment, but he felt it completely, like a slab on his chest. The next morning, he went to the church in the neighborhood where he grew up. He wasn't a believer, not even a practicing one, but he sat in a pew at the back, looking at the figure of the Virgin Mary, without saying a single word. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Finally he murmured, "Let her survive. Let them both survive. Then, do with me what you will." He left there without peace, without redemption, but with something he had never felt before, the certainty that he had ruined his life and someone else's. That same afternoon, he received a call. It was Laura's mother, cold and precise. "The baby is still alive, but her heart is weak. It is not known if she will survive." Santiago swallowed hard. "And Laura is still unconscious. If she wakes up, I don't know if she'll want to see you again." Then silence. "I'm only telling you because I don't want you to find out from someone else, not because you deserve it." And she hung up. Santiago stood there with the phone in his hand, the room spinning, the air thick, life suspended. That night, for the first time, he said something he had never admitted. "I am an abuser, and I knew it all along." Inside room 312 of the intensive care unit, the sound of the monitors was the only thing marking the passage of time. Beep, beep, beep. Each beep seemed to hold a sigh. Laura was still unconscious, her face covered in bruises, an oxygen tube in her nose, and an IV dripping slowly next to her bed. Her belly was still slightly swollen, like a promise hanging by a thread. The doctors didn't say it openly, but every day that passed without significant improvement was another day on the tightrope. The baby, although still alive, was experiencing episodes of tachycardia. Any change could be fatal. On the other side of the glass, her mother didn't move. She slept sitting up, ate in short bursts, and never let go of the rosary she had been holding between her fingers since the first night. Laura's sister, Mariana, came and went with medical reports, messages of support, and a silent fury that grew with each passing hour. The news had already spread, first among Laura's co-workers, then among the neighbors in the building, and then, inevitably, on social media. Someone leaked a picture of her being wheeled into the hospital on a stretcher, and another of Santiago's face when he was seen leaving the emergency room with his hands bandaged. The hashtags quickly exploded. Justice for Laura, not one more. Santiago Muñoz violent. The digital lynching was brutal. Hundreds of messages condemning him. People posting old screenshots of Laura with phrases that were now interpreted as signs. Sometimes love hurts, but it's worth it. There are difficult days, but we're still together. Someone even posted a video of Laura crying discreetly at a party months ago. At the time, no one asked why. Now everyone understood. Santiago, seeing his face in the headlines, knew he was no longer a man. He was a symbol of all those who claimed to love but controlled, of those who swore to protect but hit, of those who asked for forgiveness but did it again. And he couldn't blame anyone for hating him. He received threats, a broken bottle at the entrance to the place where he was staying, graffiti on the door, murderer. Even his own father, who at first tried to justify him, ended up turning his back on him. I have no words, son. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you've become. Santiago said nothing. He just hung up. He returned to the hospital once more in the hope of seeing Laura, even from a distance. But when he arrived, he was stopped by 2 police officers at the entrance. One of them, serious, read a document. There is a temporary restraining order. You cannot approach the patient or the area where she is. I just want to know if she's alive, Santiago whispered, his voice breaking. That's not for you to decide. Santiago backed away. He looked at the building as if he were looking at a locked door and knew he would never cross it again. He turned around and walked aimlessly. That night, Mariana posted an update on social media. My sister is still fighting, and so is the baby. We appreciate your prayers. What we don't appreciate is the silence of those who knew something was wrong and never said anything. Abuse isn't always visible, but it always leaves signs. Laura gave them. We didn't know how to see them. The post went viral in a matter of hours, with comments, shares, and testimonies from women who identified with it. It was as if Laura, without saying a word, was screaming for everyone from that hospital bed. Meanwhile, Santiago wrote more letters than ever, not to ask for forgiveness, not anymore. It was as if he were trying to rebuild himself with every word. He began to read about controlling behavior, about psychological violence, about patterns of abuse, and for the first time, he stopped justifying himself. I was a coward, he wrote. I hid behind love. I called my insecurity jealousy. I called my need to control protection. I called my violence passion. He didn't send those words. He kept them in a box. Days later, he received a call from the hospital. It was brief, informative. The patient had opened her eyes. She was awake, but she didn't want to see visitors. Santiago hung up and collapsed. Laura had woken up, and he was no longer part of her world. Laura opened her eyes slowly, as if her body had trouble accepting that she was still there. The first thing she saw was a white, still ceiling with a yellow stain in one corner. The light hurt her eyes. The constant hum of the machines anchored her to reality. She couldn't move her body much. She felt a burning sensation in her chest, pain in her hip, and a familiar pressure in her belly. She tried to turn her head, but a sharp pain forced her to stay still. Then she heard a voice. "My love," her mother whispered on the verge of tears. Laura turned her gaze with difficulty. Her eyes filled with tears, not because of emotion, but because of the confirmation that she was alive. And the baby? It took her mother a few seconds to answer. "He's in an incubator. They're monitoring him every hour. He's fighting, Lorita. Just like you." Laura closed her eyes. 2 tears rolled down her cheeks. She said nothing else. She just let herself sink into the silence. The images in her head were fragmented. She remembered the street, the argument, the blow, the ground approaching, her hands on her belly, and then darkness. Days passed. Laura got better. The swelling went down. She was able to sit up, talk, cry. The nurses witnessed her first smile. It was when she saw a photo of her tiny baby, connected to tubes, but with his eyes closed as if he were sleeping peacefully. "He's a fighter," said the doctor. "Like you." But inside her there was more than tenderness. There was anger, sadness, a guilt that did not belong to her, but weighed just as heavily. Meanwhile, Santiago had begun to truly change. He left the hostel. He joined a group of abusive men who, like him, were trying to understand what they had done. He sat in a circle with other faces full of shame and listened for the first time to the stories of others, some worse, others so similar that they turned his stomach. Every Tuesday he stood in front of the group and spoke. He didn't make excuses or justify himself. He named everything with the right word. I hit her. I controlled her. I belittled her. At the same time, he began to collaborate with a foundation that helped women who were victims of violence. They didn't give him important tasks. They just let him clean, move boxes, organize papers. No one trusted him. No one smiled at him, and he understood. In a notebook, he wrote a phrase that he repeated like a mantra. "I'm not doing this to be forgiven. I'm doing it because I can't continue being who I was." 2 weeks passed, then 3. Santiago didn't try to contact Laura. He didn't ask to see her. He didn't insist. But Mariana, her sister, showed up one day outside the support group. She saw him leave, watched him from a distance, said nothing. 3 days later, she left a note in the mailbox where he lived. She already knows you're trying to change. Don't ask how, but don't expect anything. She's focused on her son and herself. Don't fail again, even if no one is watching you. Santiago kept that note as if it were sacred. On the 32nd day since the incident, he received a manila envelope at home. Inside was a sheet from the hospital, a copy of his son's first ultrasound, with no message, no signature, just the blurry image of a life that, despite everything, was still growing. Santiago cried when he saw it, not out of sadness, but because for a moment he felt that there was still something worth rebuilding. A second chance, not with her, not with his son, but with himself. The news of Laura's discharge was not announced with fanfare. There were no balloons, no flowers, no applause, just a respectful silence among the doctors and the look of love in her mother's eyes as she watched her leave in a wheelchair with her newborn son in her arms, fragile as a breath. The baby had survived against all odds, against all pain. He was born prematurely, but his heart held on as if Laura's will had multiplied in the tiny body of that child. They gave him the name she had chosen weeks earlier, when she was still living in hope. Matias. Laura and Matias moved into her mother's house. The recovery was slow and difficult, both physically and emotionally. The nights were long, and flashbacks appeared uninvited. There were days when Laura couldn't look at her reflection in the mirror without remembering the hand that had been raised against her. And yet she got up every day for Matias, for herself, for the times she had remained silent, for the times she had believed she deserved what she was going through. On the other side of town, Santiago was also going through a process. He was not free, but he had been provisionally released while the hearings were taking place. The legal process was underway. He had to report every week, remain under evaluation, and comply with mandatory therapy. He couldn't go near Laura, but the judge allowed him, upon formal request, to send her a letter, just one. He wrote it over 5 nights, tore it up twice. Finally, he handed it over with trembling hands. He knew she probably wouldn't read it, but he wrote it anyway. Days later, he received a reply. Not a letter, but a message delivered by Laura's sister. She wants to see you just once. Santiago felt his heart sink into his stomach. The meeting was arranged in a small room at a family mediation institution, neutral, cold, with 2 chairs facing each other and a camera in the corner of the ceiling. When Laura entered, time seemed to stand still. Her hair was pulled back, her face thinner, but with a new strength in her eyes, one that Santiago had never seen before, one that could not be broken. Matias slept in her arms. Santiago remained standing. He didn't know whether to speak, kneel, or cry. Laura sat down delicately, without looking directly at him. She wrapped her son in a blanket. She looked at him for a few seconds, then looked up, firmly. "I don't want to hear any explanations," she said, without a tremor in her voice. Santiago looked down and nodded, pressing his lips together. "I only came because I need to look you in the eyes and tell you something," she continued. "I need you to listen carefully because I'm not going to repeat it." He swallowed. He could barely hold her gaze. She, on the other hand, seemed to be made of stone. "You have no right to look at him." The sentence fell like a hammer. It was neither a shout nor an insult. It was a sentence, a definitive line. Santiago looked up desperately. "Laura, I know I failed. I know. Every day I know it more. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted to see you, to know that you're okay." She looked at him for a few seconds, then looked at Matias. "We're alive. That's enough." The center's coordinator intervened gently, pointing out that time was up. Laura got up slowly, adjusted the blanket, and looked at Santiago one last time. "This was for me, not for you," and she left. Santiago remained there alone with his hands on his knees, his eyes fixed on the empty chair in front of him, and the echo of an irreversible truth. Love that is not nurtured is lost forever. The city of Querétaro dawned differently. For Laura, everything was new. The streets, the sounds, even the climate. The air was cleaner. People walked quickly but without fear. And although she didn't know anyone, she felt that this was exactly what she needed. Anonymity, distance, freedom. She had found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet area thanks to a support program for women in situations of violence. It wasn't luxurious, but it had the essentials: security and silence. Matthias slept in a white crib by the window, with a blanket knitted by his grandmother. Laura watched him sleep as if watching a wound heal. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would wake up with a start, her heart racing and her body covered in cold sweat. Blurred images from the past would appear without warning. The argument, the shouting, the blow, the floor. But when she heard her son's soft breathing, everything fell back into place. It was on one of those early mornings that she decided to seek professional help, not because she was weak, but because she understood that she couldn't handle everything on her own. That's how she ended up at a mental health clinic for women. At the reception desk, she was greeted by a young woman with curly hair, light brown skin, a warm smile, and a firm voice. "Hi, I'm Adriana. First time here?" Laura nodded, unable to say much. She felt that if she spoke, something inside her would break. Adriana didn't press her. She just offered her a notebook and a pencil. "Write down what you feel. It doesn't have to make sense. Just write it down." Laura did. For 15 minutes, she filled pages with words she had never said out loud. Anger, shame, fear, love, confusion, guilt, freedom. When she finished, Mariana smiled at her. "You're doing well. You're starting. And that's already a victory." As the days passed, the routine became a refuge. Matthias ate every 3 hours, cried less, and began to respond with small smiles. Laura learned to prepare milk with one hand, change diapers in the dark, and sleep in 20-minute blocks. In her sessions with Adriana, she began to talk not about Santiago, not directly. She talked about her silences, her renunciations. How one day she stopped wearing makeup and didn't realize it. How she drifted away from her friends without explanation. How she came to believe she was guilty for making another man laugh. "They didn't break you in one fell swoop," Adriana told her. "One afternoon they wore you down bit by bit, but that can also be rebuilt, and you've already started." Laura cried when she heard that, not out of sadness, but out of relief, because someone was finally telling her that she wasn't broken, just hurt. Little by little, she began to walk with her head held high again, to look people in the eye, to trust her own judgment. They weren't big changes. They were small steps, but they were steady. One afternoon, on her way back from the community center, she found a white envelope under her apartment door. There was no return address, just her name written in familiar handwriting. She recognized it immediately. It was the same handwriting as the letter that had been left next to the pregnancy test on the night when everything changed. Trembling, she opened the envelope. Inside was a sheet of paper folded into 4 parts. The paper was identical to the one she had used to write to Santiago when she wanted to tell him the news of her pregnancy. In the upper corner was just one sentence: "Thank you for not giving up on me." Laura felt her chest tighten. She didn't know if the letter was from him or if someone else had written it. It didn't matter because she didn't need answers. What she did know with every fiber of her being was that she had achieved something that many don't. She had made it out alive. And not only that, she had made a fresh start. It was Friday afternoon, and the sky over Querétaro was covered with heavy clouds, as if the entire city were holding its breath. Laura had just left her last therapy session of the month. She was calm with Matthias in her baby carrier, sleeping with that peace on his face that only very young children know. The wind blew her hair, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to walk. But when she got home, as she crossed the building's gate, she saw Santiago standing by the gate with his head down, his face thinner, his hair grown out, and his hands in his pockets. He had a dull look in his eyes, the kind that comes from crying silently for weeks. He didn't take a step forward. He just looked at her, like someone who knows he has no right to be there. Laura stopped. Everything inside her lit up, her heart, her skin, her maternal instinct. Matthias continued to sleep, innocent, oblivious. Santiago looked up awkwardly. He seemed nervous, but not violent. There was no anger in him anymore, only guilt, or something very similar. "I'm not here to cause you trouble," he said in a low, broken voice. "I know I shouldn't be here, but I needed to see you one more time. How are you now?" Laura took a deep breath. She didn't back down. She didn't tremble. "You're violating a restraining order. You know that." "Yes." He nodded, lowering his eyes. "And if you have to call the police, do it." "I'm not moving." The silence between them was long, uncomfortable, thick like the humidity in the air before a storm. "Why are you here?" "Because I haven't slept since I saw you in that room. Because I can't get everything I did to you out of my head. Because after you, nothing seems real to me anymore. I've tried to change. I'm going to therapy. I'm writing. I'm working on things that I don't know if they'll ever be of any use. But even so, I still feel that everything I do is not enough. Not nearly enough." Laura didn't look away. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just listened. And when he finished speaking, she took a step forward. "Do you want to know how I feel?" Santiago nodded without looking up. "I feel disgust. I feel anger. I feel that for years you sold me a story disguised as love, when in reality you just wanted to be in control. You took parts of me away that I'm still trying to get back. You looked at me with jealousy, with distrust, with hatred, and I mistook it for affection. You isolated me. You made me believe that love is endurance, that love hurts. And when I finally decided to give myself a chance to be happy, to build something with you, you broke me. You left me lying on the floor with my son in my womb." Santiago looked at her with tears in his eyes, unable to say a word. "And yet I survived. And not thanks to you, not because of you, but in spite of you." Laura took a deep breath. Matthias stirred a little, but did not wake up. Santiago looked down at him as if he could hardly bear to see him, as if he knew that image would haunt him for the rest of his life. "I've read your letters," Laura continued. "Mariana gave them to me. I know you're in therapy. I know you're trying to change, and I'm glad, not for you, but for the women you might hurt later, because I don't owe you anything." And then Santiago did something she didn't expect. He knelt there on the cold concrete, under the storm-laden clouds. Santiago Muñoz, the man who once promised her eternal love, the same man who beat her, humiliated her, and almost took her son away from her. He got down on his knees and said in a broken voice, "Will you forgive me?" Laura looked at him, not as a victim, not as someone broken. She looked at him with the strength of someone who got back up on her own, with a child in her arms and her soul in pieces. And yet, she chose to keep going. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him. And then, it started to rain. The rain did not stop, falling as if the sky itself wanted to purify everything, cleanse what had been left dirty, wash away the past through the sewers of a city that was no longer the same. Santiago remained on his knees on the ground. His soaked body trembled, not from the cold, but from the absolute vulnerability in which he found himself. He was no longer a man trying to justify the unjustifiable. He was someone empty, without defenses, facing the only person who had ever truly loved him. Laura stood just a few feet away, holding Matthias close to her chest, wrapped in a sky-blue blanket, while the rain soaked her shoulders, her hair, the jeans she had stopped wearing when she still lived with him, because Santiago didn't like how they made her look. Now she wore them with pride. Her gaze did not waver. It was steady, anchored in reality, a reality she had built with pain, but also with courage. "Do you forgive me?" Santiago repeated in a weak voice, barely a whisper that dissolved in the water dripping from his mouth. Laura looked down at him, not with hatred, not with contempt. She looked at him with brutal compassion, the kind that is not given freely, a compassion born of the understanding that forgiveness is sometimes not given, but built from within. "Santiago," she said, "you have no idea what you put me through." Santiago did not move. His open hands on the wet pavement trembled. "You didn't just hit me once. You hit me every day. You made me feel worthless. Every time you were jealous of me, watched me, humiliated me. Every time you made me doubt myself, my decisions, my body, my emotions." Laura's voice didn't rise. It was controlled, calm, but every word weighed heavily. Every word opened a crack. "You broke me, Santiago. You made me small. You silenced me with your silence. You manipulated me with your promises. You isolated me. And when I finally believed that the worst was over, that maybe everything would change, you hit me. And not just me, him too. Laura looked at Matthias, asleep, oblivious to everything, protected by his mother like a human shield of love. Your son could have died. Do you understand that? Do you have any idea what it means to live knowing that the person who promised to take care of you almost killed you? Santiago lowered his head. His tears mixed with the rain. His breathing was erratic. He couldn't hold her gaze. I know, he murmured. I wake up with that every day, and every night, too. No, you don't know, she said, because you can walk freely down the street. You can sleep, eat, think. I went weeks without being able to touch my son, without knowing if I would ever meet him. And when I opened my eyes in that hospital bed, the first thing I felt wasn't joy. It was terror. Terror that he was dead. Laura took a step forward. Now she was half a meter away from him. Her body projected a new strength, a confidence born of experience, of therapy, of rebirth. And you know what the worst part is? She continued. For a long time, I believed it was my fault, that I was the one who provoked your anger, that if I wore makeup, if I laughed, if I talked to someone else, I was the one who was failing. Because you convinced me of that, Santiago groaned, lowering his head even further. His body seemed to shrink under the weight of his own actions. But not anymore. I don't blame myself anymore, Santiago. I'm no longer the woman who was afraid to raise her voice. I'm no longer the one who justified your attacks. I'm no longer the one who waited for you with fear or hope. Laura took a deep breath, gently caressed Matthias's head, and looked at him as if all her strength came from that little piece of life in her arms. And I don't need to forgive you to move on with my life. Santiago looked up, confused, broken. No, she shook her head. No, because forgiveness is not given out of obligation, or even out of compassion. It is earned, it is worked for, and you are not there. Maybe someday you will be, but I'm not waiting for you. I'm not going to give you that power again. Santiago lowered his eyes. The silence between them grew thick. Only the rain continued to fall, incessant as the backdrop to an ending that sought not redemption, but closure. Laura leaned slightly. Listen to me carefully. I wish you peace, but far from us, far from me, far from my son. Matthias will grow up without fear, without the shadow of your violence, without the weight of what you did. She paused. Her voice softened, but she remained firm. I no longer carry your guilt. Not anymore. She turned and walked toward the entrance of the building. Each step was a symbol, a break with the past. Santiago didn't move. He just watched her walk away, sunk into the pavement as the water washed his face, but not his history. Laura entered the building and slowly climbed the stairs with Matthias already beginning to stir in her arms. She entered the apartment, took off her soaked shoes, dried the baby with a towel, and laid him in his crib. She looked out the window. Santiago was gone. The storm was beginning to clear. That night, after lulling Matthias to sleep with a soft song her mother used to sing to her, Laura sat on the bed with a notebook in her hands. She began to write, not letters to him, not complaints. She wrote for herself. Today, I closed a cycle. Today, I chose myself. And today, I finally understood that justice is not always found in the courts. Sometimes it is found in the exact moment when you decide not to let anyone break you again. The next day, she hung a frame on the wall of Matthias's room with a handwritten phrase, "Love doesn't hurt. What hurts is living without self-love." Laura was no longer the same, and she didn't need to be again, because in that place where there had once been fear, there was now strength. In the space where there had been anguish, there was now calm. And in her reflection, for the first time in a long time, she saw a complete woman, free. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to explore more content on our channel. We have many more exciting and thought-provoking stories like this one that seek to inspire you and show you that there is always hope. Click on the video below and join us for another story that is sure to captivate you from the very beginning. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comments, and share this video with those you think might need it. Thank you for being part of this community. See you next time.